As the final beams of my cabin crashed into the lake, I saw a smug grin creep across the overly painted face of our Ho Queen. She stood flanked by her usual crew, clapping like they'd just achieved something noble. They believed they'd won. What they didn't realize was that I'd been quietly gathering evidence via every threat, every step they took. I had it all. People in power are expected to act with responsibility, but sometimes, it gives them the chance to flex their egos. And when they target the wrong person, they might find themselves learning a lesson they never saw coming. This wasn't over, not even close. In fact, it had just begun. I remember the day I decided to build that cabin like it happened just yesterday. It had been 3 years since Claria, my wife, lost her battle with cancer. I had finally found the strength to honor the promise I'd made to her. One day, Matthew, she'd said on one of her better days, we'll build that cozy cabin by the lake, and Lily can grow up watching the sunsets, just like we used to when we met. Claire never got the chance to see that dream come true, but I was determined to make it real for Lily. As the county's land permit director for over 15 years, I knew exactly how to proceed. I filed every necessary permit, double-checked boundary lines, and followed every rule to the letter. The piece of land by the serene lake, adjacent to our main property, was perfect, quiet, scenic, and legally outside the jurisdiction of Whispering Pines Estates Ho. But I had a feeling they wouldn't see it that way. The day we broke ground was unforgettable. My daughter Lily, 12 years old, mature and bright, wore her mother's old gardening hat and scooped the first bit of soil. Mom would have loved this, Dad, she said with a smile that looked so much like Claire's. We kept it small, just close friends. George Edwards, the retired county commissioner who now ran the local hardware store and had once given me my first government job, and Jessica Morgan, our next-door neighbor and a real estate lawyer from the neighborhood next to ours. It was a beautiful spring day, with just enough breeze to keep the bugs at bay. We'd barely finished placing the foundation markers when I saw her marching toward USA. Amber Patterson. At 38, she was the self-proclaimed queen of the Ho, dressed in a fake designer jacket and ridiculous high-heeled boots completely unsuited for the rough lakeside ground. "What do you think you're doing, Matthew?" she called out, skipping any kind of greeting. Her oversized sunglasses couldn't hide the irritation on her face. Her bottle blonde hair, with visible dark roots, bounced as she tapped her foot impatiently. "This violates Ho regulations. Section 23.4 clearly says all construction needs board approval, which means me." "Behind me," George quietly snorted. Amber was infamous in our area. She used to be a mid-level manager at a big real estate firm until her need to control everything got her fired. Now, she poured all that energy into bossing around our community like it was her private empire. "Actually, Amber," I replied calmly, "this lot is outside Ho territory." I reviewed the original county survey myself. I held up my folder of official documents, a quiet reminder that I knew what I was doing. After all, this was my profession. The next day, I wasn't surprised to find a notice from the Ho in my mailbox. It ordered me to stop construction immediately or face daily fines of $500. I dropped it into the recycling bin without even pausing. But what did catch me off guard was the emergency home meeting Amber scheduled just 3 days later. She framed my simple cabin as a threat to home values and an eyesore to the community's carefully curated appearance. I attended the meeting, doing my best to stay composed despite how ridiculous it all sounded. "The cabin follows all codes and is built with natural materials meant to blend with the environment," I explained. "It's a small, tasteful structure on property I own." Some of the 20 or so neighbors present nodded in support. Others, clearly loyal to Amber, looked disapproving. Then Brett Wilson stood up. At 48, he was Amber's right-hand man and owner of a local gym chain. Arms crossed, he chimed in, "Rules are rules, Matthew. Just because you work for the county doesn't mean you're exempt." From there, the meeting spiraled. Amber declared she'd do whatever it took to stop the project. As I walked out, Jessica caught up with me in the parking lot. "Matthew, I don't like this." Amber has a way of taking things too far. I appreciated her concern, but I wasn't shaken. What can she really do? I have every permit. The land is mine. The cabin meets every regulation. Jessica didn't look convinced. "Just be careful," That woman's made enemies out of half the neighborhood already. 1 week later, I saw what Jessica meant. I received a formal letter from the law firm claiming I'd violated multiple regulations. At the bottom was the signature, Scott Patterson, Amber's husband, a partner at a corporate law firm. This had officially turned personal. The certified letter from Scott's firm sat ominously on the kitchen counter. One morning, Lily spotted it. "Is this about our cabin, Dad?" she asked, her voice soft and uncertain as she read the letterhead. I gently took it from her and set it back down, forcing a calm expression. "Yes, sweetheart. But it's nothing for you to worry about. Some people just don't understand how special that cabin is to us." I kissed her head and handed her the lunch I'd packed. "Remember what Mom always used to say? Don't let the turkeys get you down." That got a smile out of her before she ran off to catch the school bus. Once I was alone, I finally let out the breath I'd been holding. The letter was packed with vague threats, talks of violating aesthetic standards and preparing for swift legal action. The intimidating language in the letter was meant to scare me, but it only made me more determined. That afternoon, I met with Jessica in her downtown office. The walls were lined with law books and diplomacy, a clear sign of her real estate law expertise. "This is harassment, plain and simple," she said after reviewing the letter and my property documents. "Your land extends beyond the HOA boundary, according to the original plat maps. Amber is overstepping." She adjusted her glasses and leaned forward. "But Matthew, you need to understand something. HOAs have a lot of power, even when they're wrong, and Amber seems dead set on making an example out of you." I nodded, catching the unspoken warning. I'd never shown her the fear that so many others did. Jessica smiled. "Exactly. You're the first person who hasn't backed down. That makes you dangerous in her eyes." We talked through options. The plan was for me to keep building while she prepared legal defenses for any moves they might try. As I got up to leave, she added, "One more thing, document everything. Every conversation, every letter, every step in construction. We might need it." Taking her advice seriously, I installed security cameras around the site and pushed forward with the foundation. George helped me find quality lumber at a discount, and we made steady progress. Meanwhile, Amber's harassment grew worse. She began calling county offices nearly every day, reporting made-up code violations. My colleagues would roll their eyes and fill me in at lunch. She called again. "Maxwell Thompson, my 52-year-old supervisor in the planning department, told me once, claims your foundation's 6 inches too close to the water." I told him, "We've already inspected and approved it twice." Max was supportive, but I could see the strain these constant complaints put on the department. One day, during a routine inspection for another property, I noticed something interesting. Brett Wilson, Amber's right-hand man in the HOA, had an unpermitted swimming pool in his backyard. I made a mental note but didn't report it. I still hoped we could resolve this without further conflict. The following Tuesday, I was at an all-day training session at the county office. Lily stayed home from school with a mild fever. Around noon, I got a frantic call. "Dad, Mrs. Patterson is here with Mr. Wilson and some others. They're trying to inspect our backyard and the lake area. I told them you weren't home, but they won't leave." I excused myself immediately and called Jessica on the way to my car. "I'm heading there now. Can you meet me? This is trespassing." 15 minutes later, I arrived home. Amber and her entourage were still there, standing at the edge of my property, staring toward the lake and the half-built cabin foundation. Lily watched nervously from the kitchen window. "What do you think you are doing on my property?" I asked, my voice calm but firm. Amber turned without a hint of embarrassment. "Conducting an HOA inspection. It's within our rights. Not without notice, not without my presence, and definitely not on property outside your jurisdiction." I shot back. Brett stepped forward, his gym owner physique trying to intimidate. "We've received complaints about your construction project." I glanced around. "From whom?" "There are no neighbors for 100 yards that way." Amber's eyes narrowed behind oversized sunglasses. "Your daughter was very rude to us, Matthew. Maybe you should teach her some respect for authority." That was it. I could take their harassment, but bringing my daughter into it was a line they couldn't cross. "My daughter knows to be wary of trespassers. Now get off my property before I call the sheriff and file a restraining order." Jessica's car pulled up just then, lending weight to my warning. Amber glanced between us, then gestured to her group. "Let's go, we've seen enough." As they left, I heard her mutter, "This isn't over, not by a long shot." Later that evening, after tucking Lily into bed with a chapter of her favorite book, I noticed she was unusually quiet. "Dad," she said softly, "Mrs. Patterson said some mean things about you today. She said you think you are above the rules and that you're going to get in trouble at work." I sat beside her, heart-aching. "Honey, sometimes adults say unkind things when they don't get their way. Mrs. Patterson is upset because I'm not letting her tell us what to do with our property. But I promise, everything I'm doing is completely legal." Lily nodded, but I could see the worry lingering in her eyes. "Is she going to stop us from building Mom's cabin?" "No," I said firmly, brushing her hair back. "Nobody's going to stop us from keeping our promise to Mom. Some things are worth fighting for, and this is one of them." At the next home meeting, I confronted Amber directly, keeping my voice steady despite the anger boiling inside. "Stay away from my daughter. Whatever you have against me, keep it with me." The room went silent, watching the tense standoff. Amber smirked, tapping her pen against the podium. "Is that a threat, Mr. Miller?" "Because I have connections with several county board members. It would be a shame if your professional judgment came into question." The implied threat to my job hung in the air. I smiled back. "I've been enforcing land use regulations fairly for 15 years, Amber. My record speaks for itself." As I left the meeting, Olivia Stewart, a 41-year-old elementary school teacher and reluctant home member, caught up with me. "I'm sorry about all this, Matthew. Not everyone agrees with how she's handling things." I nodded, appreciating the support, but I was starting to realize this fight was far from over. The next day at work, I discovered something alarming. Someone had access to my file on the cabin project and altered some measurements to changes that would make it look like I'd violated setback rules. The security log showed the files had been accessed using Maxwell's credentials. That night, after dealing with the file tampering, I came home late to find my construction materials vandalized, bags of cement slashed open and ruined by rain, and expensive lumber damaged. The security cameras had been mysteriously disabled. Standing there in the rain, staring at the destruction, a cold anger settled over me. If this was how they wanted to play, then the gloves were off. The next morning, before work, I headed to the hardware store. George Edwards was already there, brewing coffee behind the counter. When I told him about the vandalism, his weathered face darkened. "I never did like that whole crowd," he muttered. "What are you going to do now?" he asked. I thought for a moment. "Start by installing better security cameras." "And I'm not stopping construction." George disappeared into the back room and came out with a box. "Military-grade cameras, waterproof, night vision, and they upload directly to cloud storage." When I reached for my wallet, he waved me off. "Consider it my contribution to justice. Your Claire was a good woman. She deserves to have her cabin built." With George's help, I set up the new cameras and ordered replacement materials. Working on the cabin had become my way of fighting back. One afternoon, Amber escalated things. A small group of home members showed up at the edge of my property, holding signs about protecting property values and opposing rustic eyes. They staged what they probably thought was a protest, taking photos and documenting alleged violations. I kept working, ignoring them. After about an hour, they left, but not before Amber shouted, "We've filed a formal complaint with the county planning department, Matthew. This time you won't be able to hide behind your position." The next day, I received an official notice from the planning department, signed by Maxwell Thompson. It said my permits needed review due to concerns raised by community members. I marched straight to Max's office. "What's this about?" "You know every inch of that cabin plan meets code." Max couldn't meet my eyes. "I'm sorry, Matthew. Commissioner Davis requested the review personally. He plays golf with Scott Patterson." The pieces fell into place. Amber was using her husband's connections to pressure the department. As I left Max's office, my phone rang. It was Jessica. "We need to talk. I found something interesting about the HOA's boundaries." By then, the cabin was about 60% done, the basic structure up, roof on, Windows and interior in progress. Jessica had discovered that the HOA had quietly expanded its boundaries 5 years ago without properly notifying all affected property owners, a legally questionable move at best. On a rainy Thursday morning, Max called me into an emergency meeting at the planning department. The conference room was packed with officials, including Commissioner Davis. "Mr. Miller," Davis began, "we've received a formal complaint about your permit approvals. The complainant alleges a conflict of interest in you approving construction on your own property." I stayed calm and explained that standard protocol was followed, with approvals by Senior Planner Robertson, not by me. Halfway through the meeting, my phone buzzed repeatedly. It was Lily. I stepped outside to answer. "Dad," her voice was panicked, "there are people here with trucks and equipment. They're tearing down the cabin. They say they have HOA authorization." My blood ran cold. "Lily, stay inside. Call Jessica immediately." "I'm on my way." I rushed back in. "Commissioner, while we've been discussing paperwork, the HOA has sent a demolition crew to my property without any legal authority." I sped home, Max following behind. When we arrived, a private demolition crew had already torn down half the cabin. Amber stood watching with a satisfied look, Brett by her side. Lily was on the porch, tears streaming down her face. Jessica argued heatedly with the crew foreman. "Stop this immediately," I shouted. "You have no legal authority here." The foreman pulled out a document with whole letterhead, "Not a county demolition order. This isn't a legal document. You're trespassing and destroying private property." Max stepped forward, showing his county ID. "I'm director of the planning department. No demolition permits have been issued for this address. Cease operations immediately." The foreman hesitated, glancing between Max and Amber. Amber approached, feigning innocence. "There must be some misunderstanding. We're just enforcing HOA regulations." I faced her. "This property is outside your HOA jurisdiction. This is criminal trespassing, property destruction, and fraud." Brett stepped in, placing himself between us. "Watch your accusations, Miller. Interfere with HOA business, and we'll have the sheriff remove you." His threat was absurd. "Please do," I said. "I'd love to explain how you're demolishing property without a county permit." The confrontation grew tense, with the demolition crew standing awkwardly by their equipment. Amber, realizing her plan was faltering, changed tactics. "Fine, stop for now. But this isn't over, Matthew. The HOA board has unanimously voted this structure violates our community standards." Just then, the remaining section of the cabin frame collapsed with a sickening crack, sending wooden beams tumbling toward the lake. Lily let out a small cry from the porch. I turned to Amber, my voice deadly calm despite my rage. "You've just made the biggest mistake of your life," she smirked. "We'll see about that." Later that evening, after tucking Lily into bed with a chapter of her favorite book, I sat with her on the porch swing, filing reports with the sheriff's department and county commissioners. Lily's eyes were red from crying, her small hands clutching one of Claire's old sweaters tightly. "I'm sorry, Dad," she whispered. "I didn't know what to do to stop them." I pulled her close. "You did exactly the right thing by calling me and Jessica. This isn't your fault." She looked out over the wreckage, a splintered wood, scattered materials, the foundation half exposed to the rain. "Are we giving up?" she asked softly. I followed her gaze to the ruined cabin, then to Claire's favorite maple tree nearby. "No," I said firmly, "we are not giving up. But when you're up against people who don't play fair, sometimes you have to change your strategy." The sadness in her eyes gave way to determination. "Like chess," she said quietly. "You taught me sometimes you have to sacrifice a piece to win the game." I smiled. "Exactly like chess, honey." And guess what? They just sacrificed their queen without even realizing it. That weekend, I transformed our dining room into a war room. Jessica arrived with legal documents, and George brought in a whiteboard where we began mapping out everything about the HOA and its weaknesses. The original HOA boundaries from when Whispering Pines was founded in 2003 clearly excluded the lakefront properties. Jessica pointed to a faded map. Then in 2018, they quietly filed this amendment expanding their jurisdiction to include the lakefront HOA, but they never got the required 75% homeowner approval. I nodded, following her explanation. "And my property falls right in that disputed area." Jessica gave a grim smile. "Exactly. That amendment is legally questionable at best, fraudulent at worst. Monday morning, I arrived early at the county offices. As land permit director, I had full access to all building records. I went through every permit and inspection report for Whispering Pines properties over the past 5 years. By lunchtime, I had a damning list. Brett Wilson's unpermitted swimming pool without safety fencing, Amber's basement gym converted without electrical permits, plus violations from 6 other HOA board members or their allies. Even more telling was Amber's recent application for a sprawling home addition, including an indoor pool and entertainment space that blatantly violated setback requirements. The application should have been rejected immediately for multiple code violations, but instead, it was being reviewed by a new hire who reported directly to Commissioner Davis, bypassing normal procedures. That evening, Jessica called with her own revelations. "I've talked to former home members who moved away," she said. 3 families mentioned financial irregularities during Amber's tenure. She's been using HOA funds for luxury research trips, and one former treasurer quit after questioning her expenses. Amber even threatened to put a lien on my house over a garden shed paint color. She's bullied half the neighborhood through intimidation and selective enforcement. George dug into the Pattersons' past. They've done this before. Lived in 3 different HOA communities, each time working their way onto the board, then pushing aggressive enforcement and stirring conflict until they move on. They've been sued twice by former neighbors. Then Max Thompson requested a private meeting off county grounds. Commissioner Davis pulled me aside first. "Before your permits got flagged," Max admitted, "Scott Patterson expressed concerns about your project. He suggested it'd be best for the department to find issues with your application. I should have stood my ground, but," Davis confided, "my daughter just started college. I can't afford to lose this job." This was serious. A county commissioner abusing power for a personal vendetta. That night, staring at the ruins of the cabin, I weighed my options. As land permit director, I had the authority to order inspections on code violations. I'd always used this power carefully, but now, with the evidence on my desk, I had a real chance to expose the HOA board's hypocrisy. After midnight, Lily found me on the porch. "Dad, remember what Mom used to say about bullies? They're only powerful when people are afraid." I smiled. She was right, as usual. Lily yawned. "Maybe it's time to show them we're not afraid anymore." The next morning, Lily showed me detailed drawings for a redesigned cabin. "I've been thinking about how to rebuild it better," she said, her excitement reminding me why this fight mattered. "These are beautiful, honey," I told her, "and we will rebuild." She looked up. "But first, we have to deal with Mrs. Patterson, right?" I nodded, turning to the whiteboard covered in our strategy notes. "Yes, and I think it's time we stop playing defense." She followed my gaze to the list of HOA violations we had uncovered. "Sometimes, justice needs a little push from people who know how to use the system." Monday morning, I walked into my office with a renewed purpose. I handed my assistant the first folder: documentation on Brett Wilson's unpermitted pool. "This is for a safety inspection." Unpermitted pool, no fencing, serious violation near the elementary school. By noon, official notices had been sent to Brett and 5 other HOA board members or Amber's allies, all for legitimate violations. I made sure the inspections were assigned to our most thorough inspectors. That afternoon, Brett stormed into my office, waving the inspection notice. "What the hell is this?" I looked up calmly. "Standard procedure for unpermitted structures, Mr. Wilson, especially those with safety concerns." He leaned over my desk. "We both know what you're doing, Miller. This is retaliation." I kept my professionalism. "Actually, it's enforcement of county building codes, something your HOA claims to value." The pool lacked the required safety fence, had no self-closing gate with a child-proof lock, and was built without proper electrical permits. These were serious violations that could lead to a child drowning. I saw the color drain from Brett's face. "The inspection is scheduled for tomorrow at 10 a.m., I told him. As he left, I overheard him on the phone. "Amber, we have a problem." The inspections triggered violation notices for all 6 properties, with fines totaling over $20,000. Each was given the same choice they'd presented to me: either bring the structures into compliance or remove them completely. Amber called an emergency HOA meeting. which Jessica and I attended along with about 30 other homeowners. Word had spread quickly about the crackdown. Amber took the podium, her voice theatrical. "This is a clear abuse of power. Matthew Miller is using his position to launch a vendetta against board members who were simply enforcing our community standards." When she paused for breath, I raised my hand and said calmly, "May I respond?" Walking to the front, I explained, "Every inspection followed standard procedure, based on documented code violations of the very standards the HOA claims to uphold." I turned to face the crowd. "But there's a bigger issue many of you might not know about. In 2018, under Mrs. Patterson's leadership, the HOA expanded its boundaries to include lakefront property included without the required homeowner approval." Murmurs spread as I handed out copies of the original HOA boundaries and the questionable amendment. "This means the HOA's actions against my cabin were unauthorized," I continued, "and it calls into question other decisions affecting properties in these disputed areas." Chaos erupted as homeowners confronted Amber about the boundary changes and selective enforcement. Olivia Stewart stood up. "We deserve answers about how our dues are spent, especially if they went toward the illegal demolition of property outside the HOA's jurisdiction." Amber's carefully applied makeup couldn't hide her fury. "This meeting is adjourned," she declared, slamming down her gavel and storming out with Brett and a few supporters. The remaining homeowners gathered around Jessica and me, sharing their own stories of HOA overreach. By the end of the evening, 20 homeowners were ready to sign affidavits detailing Amber's mismanagement and intimidation tactics. The next morning, I sent a formal letter to every household in Whispering Pines, outlining the boundary manipulation, financial irregularities, and selective enforcement under Amber's leadership. By lunchtime, Amber burst into my office, eyes blazing. "You've gone too far, Miller," she hissed. "You think you can turn my own neighborhood against me?" "I built Whispering Pines into what it is today." I leaned back, unfazed. "Actually, you've done a remarkable job of turning people against yourself. I'm just shining a light on it." She jabbed a finger at me. "I will destroy your career." "Scott's golfing with the county executive director this weekend. How long do you think you'll keep your job?" I opened my desk drawer and pulled out a thick file. "Before you make threats, you might want to look at this." I laid out hundreds of pages filled with documented violations, financial discrepancies, and sworn statements from neighbors. Her eyes scanned the files, and the weight of reality settled in. Her voice softened. "Matthew, surely we can work something out, maybe reach a mutual agreement?" She pulled out her checkbook. "The HOA could compensate you for the cabin say, $25,000 in exchange for dropping this misunderstanding." Unbeknownst to her, Jessica had given me a recording device that captured every word. "Are you offering me a bribe, Mrs. Patterson?" I asked. She backtracked quickly. "Not a bribe, compensation for damages." I stood firm. "This conversation is over. Please direct any further communication through legal channels." Her face twisted back to rage. "You'll regret this, Matthew. I promise you'll disappear from this county for good." As she stormed out, I stopped the recording and immediately made digital copies. Later that day, I received a notice from the County Ethics Committee. I was under investigation for potential conflicts of interest in permit approvals. The complaint was anonymous, but clearly came from Amber, likely using her husband's connections. The investigation would temporarily restrict my ability to issue permits, including those related to the HOA properties I had just cited. Driving home, I called Jessica. "They're trying to tie my hands." "An ethics investigation can drag on for months." Jessica wasn't fazed. "Then we accelerate our timeline. I've prepared an injunction against the HOA based on the boundary manipulation. And with today's recording, we can add attempted bribery of a county official to the charges." I smiled despite the pressure. "You know what Claire used to say about chess?" Jessica laughed. "The best players think 5 moves ahead." "Then let's make our next move count." The county board meeting room was packed beyond capacity. The conflict of interest hearing on my permit approvals had become the most anticipated government event in years. Amber and Scott Patterson sat front and center, Scott in a tailored suit, Amber in a designer dress that clashed with her heavy makeup. Brett Wilson and other HOA board members clustered around them. Opposite them sat Jessica, Lily, George, and at least 30 Whispering Pines homeowners supporting me, including Olivia Stewart. Commissioner Davis called the meeting to order and explained the purpose of the hearing. Scott Patterson approached the podium and spun a story painting me as a rogue official abusing my power and retaliating against concerned citizens trying to maintain community standards. He portrayed Amber as a dedicated volunteer working to preserve property values, and the HOA as victims of my vendettas. When it was my turn, I walked to the podium calmly. "Thank you, Commissioner Davis, and board members, for this opportunity to address the allegations." I proceeded to methodically dismantle the conflict of interest claims, presenting thorough documentation to prove my case. My permit applications followed every proper protocol, I explained, outlining the timeline from the initial cabin construction through the HOA harassment and culminating in the illegal demolition. Then I shifted focus. What we're really facing here isn't a conflict of interest, it's an abuse of power. Not by me, but by an HOA that illegally expanded its boundaries and used intimidation to enforce rules on properties outside its jurisdiction. Commissioner Davis tried to interrupt. "Mr. Miller, please keep your comments limited to the specific allegations." I nodded respectfully. "With all due respect, Commissioner, these issues are inseparable." I proceeded to present evidence of the HOA's boundary manipulation and explained the targeted inspections I ordered as land permit director. "It's my duty to enforce building codes equally for all residents. When I discovered serious safety violations, I followed standard procedure the same that apply to every property in the county." Suddenly, Lily stood up. "May I say something, please?" she asked. Commissioner Davis nodded, and Lily walked forward with remarkable poise. "My name is Lily Miller. The cabin my dad was building was my mom's dream before she died of cancer 3 years ago. It wasn't a mansion blocking views or causing problems, it was just a small place where we could feel close to her again." Her voice wavered. "Mrs. Patterson and her friends came when my dad wasn't home and tore it down. They didn't care about the promise he made to my mom, or what it meant to me. They just wanted to win." Her simple, heartfelt words hung heavy in the room. Even Commissioner Davis seemed moved. The momentum was clearly shifting. Then Scott Patterson requested to present new evidence via documents suggesting I had fast-tracked permits for friends while delaying those for HOA board members. Amber looked triumphant. Commissioner Davis called a recess to review the materials. During the break, Jessica whispered, "Those documents look altered. The timestamps don't match our records." When the hearing resumed, I requested the original digital records be pulled from the county database. A flicker of alarm crossed Scott's face as an IT specialist was summoned. Jessica handed out packets to each board member detailed evidence of the HOA's illegal boundary expansion, financial irregularities, and testimony about intimidation tactics. Additionally, I presented proof that Mrs. Patterson tried to bribe a county official, specifically me, to drop legitimate code enforcement actions. I played the recording from my office conversation with Amber. The color drained from her face as her own voice filled the room, clearly offering money to halt the investigations. The IT specialist returned with the original permit records, confirming Scott's documents had been altered. I looked directly at Commissioner Davis. "I'd like to know who accessed and modified these records." During the next brief recess, Olivia Stewart and 5 other homeowners approached, requesting to speak about the HOA's management practices. When the hearing resumed, the atmosphere had shifted completely. Board members asked tough questions about the HOA's actions rather than my alleged violations. Homeowners testified about Amber's selective enforcement, intimidation tactics, and misuse of HOA funds. The most damning testimony came from a former HOA treasurer who had resigned over financial irregularities. Mrs. Patterson regularly approved reimbursements to herself for research trips to luxury resorts with no benefit to the community, he explained. When I questioned these expenses, I was removed from the finance committee. Amber's composed facade crumbled. She interrupted repeatedly until Commissioner Davis swore she'd be removed if she couldn't maintain decorum. After 3 hours of testimony, the board went into closed session. When they returned, Commissioner Davis read their decision on the conflict of interest allegations against me. The board finds insufficient evidence to support these claims. All proper protocols were followed in the permit approval process. However, the evidence presented raises serious concerns about the Whispering Pines HOA's governance, boundary claims, and enforcement actions. The board is initiating a comprehensive investigation and is temporarily suspending the HOA's authority pending the outcome. Additionally, the board recommends Mrs. Patterson step down immediately. Amber stood, her face twisted with rage. "You can't do this. We'll sue." Commissioner Davis banged his gavel. "Mrs. Patterson, please control yourself or you will be escorted from the building." As the meeting adjourned, neighbors surrounded me with congratulations and support. Many apologized for not standing up to Amber sooner. Jessica was already discussing forming an interim HOA board, with Olivia likely as temporary president. Through the crowd, I spotted Amber and Scott heading toward the exit, most of their former allies now avoiding them. For a moment, Amber's gaze locked with Mania, an expression of fury and disbelief that her power had crumbled so completely. I didn't feel the satisfaction I expected. Instead, there was a calm certainty that justice had finally been served. The weeks following the county hearing brought swift and significant changes. The Pattersons faced multiple consequences. The county investigation uncovered over $30,000 in questionable reimbursements Amber had claimed at expenses that looked more like personal vacations than research. Brett Wilson and other board members were hit with hefty fines for building violations. The most satisfying outcome was the civil judgment requiring the Pattersons to pay full restitution for the demolished cabin, plus damages totaling nearly $70,000. Jessica had pursued the case relentlessly, and the judge showed no sympathy after hearing the recorded bribe attempt. Olivia Stewart stepped up as interim HOA president, working alongside a new board to revise the bylaws and restore the neighborhood's original boundaries. "We're focusing on being good neighbors, not property police," she said at the first community meeting, which drew nearly 80% of homeowners, a record turnout. I attended simply as a regular resident, offering occasional permit advice but otherwise happy to be just another neighbor. Changes were happening at the county offices as well. Commissioner Davis had taken an extended leave following questions about his role in the document tampering. Maxwell Thompson had been honest about the pressure he faced, providing crucial testimony that helped expose the commissioner's involvement with the Pattersons. Max stopped by my office one afternoon, looking more relaxed than I'd seen him in months. "I want to apologize again, Matthew. I should have stood up to the commissioner from the start." I waved off his apology. "What matters is you did the right thing in the end." He nodded, then smiled. "By the way, I signed off on your new cabin permits myself. Everything's in order whenever you're ready to rebuild." 6 weeks after the hearing, a for sale sign appeared in front of the Pattersons' house. Rumors spread that Scott had accepted a position in another state, a lateral move, according to his update, but most saw it as a retreat from the reputation damage they'd suffered. Brett Wilson followed suit, putting his house on the market well below comparable properties, eager for a quick sale. As Jessica remarked over dinner, "It's amazing how quickly a power structure can collapse once people stop being afraid." Construction on the new cabin began early the following spring, almost exactly 1 year after the original project had started. This time, I had plenty of help. George organized volunteers from his hardware store customers and my county colleagues. Neighbors pitched in on weekends, some with construction skills, others bringing food for the workers. Even Max Thompson showed up in old jeans and a t-shirt, ready to help with framing. What had started as a personal project had blossomed into a community effort, a symbol of the neighborhood's renewal. Lily confidently shared her designs with volunteers, explaining her vision for each space. I often found myself watching her with a mix of pride and wistfulness, thinking how much Claire would have loved to see her like this. Jessica became a regular presence during construction, initially offering legal advice on easements, but soon just bringing coffee and working alongside us. Our friendship deepened through the conflict, evolving into something that felt increasingly like more than friendship. One evening, as we sat on the half-built porch watching the sunset, she asked quietly, "Do you ever think about how sometimes the worst things lead to unexpected good?" I nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. Claire used to say life takes detours that end up exactly where you need to be. Jessica's hand found mine as we continued watching the sunset. From across the site, Lily spotted us and smiled to herself before quietly moving away to the other side of the construction. By midsummer, The cabin was taking shape, a beautiful structure with large windows perfectly framing the lake view. Claire's presence was felt everywhere, from the color scheme she once sketched to special touches Lily incorporated from her memories. One afternoon, while I was installing window trim, George arrived with a special delivery, a handcrafted wooden sign that read "Miller's Promise," with Claire's favorite hummingbird etched in the corner. "It's perfect," I told him, my voice thick with emotion. The grand opening of the completed cabin coincided with the Whispering Pines summer block party, a beloved community tradition revived under the new HOA leadership. Neighbors wandered between festivities and tours of the finished cabin. Olivia Stewart, now officially elected HOA president, presented us with a beautiful wind chime. "We wanted something to remind you of the community's support whenever the wind blows," she explained. As the celebration continued into the evening, Jessica, Lily, and I found a quiet moment alone in the cabin. Lily hung the last of Claire's photographs of one of all three of us laughing on a beach vacation years ago in a specially built recessed shell. "Do you think Mom would like it?" she asked. I put my arm around her shoulders. "She would love every inch of it, honey." Jessica squeezed my other hand. "I never met Claire, but I feel like I know her through this place. Her spirit is in every detail." Later that night, Jessica and I sat on the porch swing, watching the moonlight dance on the lake. "I've been thinking about how differently things might have turned out if Amber had just left your cabin alone," she said softly. After a comfortable silence, I nodded, reflecting on the cascade of events that followed that first hostile encounter. "She never understood some things are worth fighting for, and no matter the cost." I glanced through the window at Lily sleeping peacefully, Claire's photo watching over her, then back to the woman beside me, a relationship I never expected to find again. The cabin, yes, but more than that, promises, principles, community. The things that truly matter. The following weekend, George stopped by with one final addition, a small wooden carving box. Once he left, I opened it to find a small wooden gavel inscribed with the words, "Justice sometimes requires knowing how to sign permits." I laughed aloud at the perfect symbol of our victory. The road to rebuilding the cabin had been far tougher than I ever imagined. What began as a simple construction project had transformed into a battle against corruption and abuse of power, and ultimately, the rebuilding not just of a structure, but of a community. Standing on the porch, gazing out at the peaceful lake as the sun set, I felt Claire's presence more strongly than I had in years. "We did it," I whispered to the evening breeze. "We kept our promise." And somewhere between the gentle lapping of waves and the first stars appearing in the twilight sky, I could almost hear her reply, "I never doubted you would." This story might be over, but ya stories has a whole vault of mayhem waiting.